My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34 and I keep other people's books for a living, which means I know exactly what a signature is worth. On Christmas Eve, my fiancé's mother stood in her own doorway and told my 7-year-old daughter to wait outside while her grandchildren ran past us with gift bags. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I knelt down, fixed Emma's mittens, and handed that woman a plain white envelope. "Open it later," I said. Then I drove my daughter home through the snow and made her cocoa. By morning, 79 missed calls were waiting on my phone, and not one of them was an apology. Some doors you don't fight to get through. You just stop paying to keep them standing. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women keep their composure while everything around them falls apart, and walk away with their dignity intact. If you believe the quietest person at the table is often the one holding the most, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up, because the envelope didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 8 months of careful records. I run a small bookkeeping and tax practice out of a converted dining room on Maple Street, 2 miles from the nice part of town and a whole world away from it. I built that practice after my divorce when Emma was 2 and I had $900 and a folding table. People in this county call me when a number won't behave. I find the mistake. I fix it quietly. And I never make them feel stupid for the hole they dug. That's the job. Somewhere along the way, it became the rest of me too. I fix things. It's the only love language I ever fully trusted, because a balanced ledger never changes its mind about you. My ex used to say I'd rather solve a problem than be held, and he wasn't entirely wrong. I was very good at reading other people's mistakes. I was a lot slower at reading my own. Emma was the one warm thing I never tried to balance. She was 7 that winter, missing a front tooth, the kind of kid who waved at strangers and meant it. She drew houses constantly, always with everyone standing in the doorway, nobody left out. I kept those drawings in a folder thicker than some of my clients' returns. I thought back then that I was building her a steady life. I just hadn't yet learned that steadiness can be a kind of blindness, and that the people who let you carry everything are rarely the people who will carry you. I met Daniel Harper at a Chamber of Commerce mixer I almost skipped. He was 39, easy in a room, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order. What got me wasn't the charm, though. It was Emma. He got down on the floor with her at our third dinner and let her win at checkers 4 times in a row, badly, on purpose, narrating his own defeat like a sports commentator. She laughed until she hiccuped. That night she called him almost dad, testing the word out sideways, and I let myself want it. We dated a year and a half. He was steady about small things. Flowers on no occasion. Oil changes I forgot. But there was one subject where his easy voice went tight, and that was his family's house. The Harpers were old money in a town that didn't have much of it, and the center of all of it was a white Victorian on Cedar Hill with a wraparound porch and his late father's name still on a brass plate by the door. Daniel talked about that house the way other men talk about a championship season. Whenever it came up, his jaw set just slightly, like a man bracing for a bill. I noticed it. I'm trained to notice when a number doesn't sit right, and a person can be a number too. The first time I went up to Cedar Hill, I understood the tight jaw. The house was beautiful and cold the way museums are cold. Every surface polished to remind you not to touch it. Margaret Harper met us in the front hall under a portrait of her dead husband. She was 63, silver-haired, dressed like she was about to be photographed for the Historical Society. She took my hand the way you'd take a damp coat. "This must be Daniel's friend," she said. When Daniel corrected her, "Fiancé, Mom," she repeated the word like it had a bad aftertaste. Then she looked down at Emma, who was holding out a dandelion she'd saved from the car, and smiled at my daughter the way you smile at a stain you're deciding whether to mention. "We're not really a dandelion family," she said, and steered us toward the parlor. I met the sister that day too. Claire, 36, with 2 kids and a husband who traveled. Claire gave me a tour that was really a list of what was expensive. By the mantel, she pointed out the family tradition: little matching gift bags, deep green tissue, gold ribbon tied in identical bows, one for each Harper grandchild every holiday. "They line up by age," Claire said, "and Margaret hands them out. It means everything to the kids." I looked at the row of gold bows and counted, out of habit. There were exactly enough for Claire's too, and none extra. Emma stood beside me, quiet, watching the ribbons catch the light. I told myself it was just a tradition that hadn't caught up to us yet. Give it time. Daniel proposed in October on the porch of the Cedar Hill house. Because of course he did. I said yes because the man I loved was kind to my kid and because I'd spent 5 years being the only adult in my own life and I was tired. The ring was his grandmother's. Margaret watched the whole thing from the parlor window with a face like she was approving a loan she'd already decided to deny. After that, the small things stacked up the way small things do. Family dinners where Claire's kids got walked through their manners and praised, while Emma got passed over like a place setting nobody had counted. A trip to the lake where there were beds for everyone but a cot for my daughter in the laundry room that nobody had thought to mention. Each time I said something to Daniel, calm and specific, the way I'd flag an error to a client, he said his mother meant well and I was reading into it. One One night I came back from the bathroom and heard Margaret in the kitchen, low, to Claire, "We'll see how long this one lasts." Claire laughed. I stood in the dark hallway with my hand on the wall and made myself breathe. Then I went back in and smiled and passed the rolls, because Emma was at that table with frosting on her chin, happier than I'd seen her in a year. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't stay for yourself. You stay because a small person you love is finally getting fed at a big bright table, and you'll swallow almost anything to keep her in that chair. To explain the envelope, I have to go back further, to a night the previous spring, 8 months before that Christmas. Daniel showed up at my door at 11 p.m., gray-faced, holding a manila folder like it was warm. "Sarah," he said, "I need you." I made coffee and read the folder while he paced. It was bad. His father, the man in the portrait, had spent the last decade borrowing against the Cedar Hill house and hiding it. There were back property taxes, a second mortgage nobody had told Margaret about, and a lien that had quietly matured. The county had set a date. In 11 weeks, the white Victorian on the hill was going to be sold on the courthouse steps for unpaid debt. "Mom doesn't know how bad it is," Daniel said. "She thinks if she sells some silver, it goes away. It doesn't go away. You do this for a living. You're the only person I know who can even read this." I read it twice. The numbers were ugly but not impossible. Roughly $90,000 stood between his family and the worst day of their lives. And I had it. The slow, careful savings of a woman who'd learned never to be $90,000 from disaster again. Daniel looked at me like a man at the edge of a roof. "Please," he said, "I'll never ask you for anything again. Here's the thing people misunderstand about me. I am soft about people and hard about paper. And that combination has saved my life more than once. I did not write the Harpers a gift. I have watched too many families turn a gift into a grievance. Instead, I did what I'd tell any client to do. I paid off the lien and the back taxes and the hidden second, all $91,000 of it, and in exchange, the family signed a private mortgage, a real one, a promissory note and a deed of trust recorded at the county the same week, naming me as the lender and the Cedar Hill house as security. Low interest, modest monthly payments, and a standard acceleration clause, the kind every note has, the kind that says, if you stop paying, the lender can call the whole balance due. I sat them all at my own kitchen table to sign, Margaret included, and I explained every line in plain English, the way I do for the scared and the elderly, because that's the decent thing. Margaret signed with her mouth pressed flat, like the pen was an insult. Daniel signed, grateful and crying. I drove to the courthouse myself and watched the clerk stamp it into the record. Then I put my copy in a blue folder and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, under Emma's drawings, and I genuinely intended never to open it again. Kindness without paperwork is just a wish, I told Daniel when he asked why I'd made his mother sign. He laughed and said I was the most romantic accountant alive. I thought I'd protected everyone. I had only protected myself. For exactly 2 months, the payments came. Then they stopped. The first missed month, Margaret sent a note on heavy cream stationery saying things were tight after the holidays and she was sure I'd understand. Family to family. The second month, nothing. By the third, when I gently raised it with Daniel, he winced and said, "Don't make Mom feel like a tenant, Sarah. She's mortified enough that you bailed us out. Can't you just let it ride?" I was a lender now. I had every right that very week to send a formal notice of default and start the clock. But I was also a woman who was about to marry into that family, with a daughter who called the place almost home. So I made a choice. I chose not to declare default. I let it ride, month after month. No notice, no demand. The balance quietly growing while I told myself patience was the loving thing. What I was starting to understand, slowly, was why Margaret's politeness toward me had a layer of frost under it that her politeness toward strangers didn't. It wasn't that she thought I was beneath the Harpers, though she did. It was worse than snobbery. Every time she looked at me, she had to remember that the divorced bookkeeper from Maple Street owned the paper on her family's house. She needed to put me somewhere below her to make the math of her own life survivable. The slide stopped being about me that fall and started being about Emma, which is a different thing entirely. I can take a cold handshake. I cannot take watching my daughter learn that she's optional. The first thing I couldn't talk myself out of was the stockings. Margaret had a mantle of them, hand-knit, each grandchild's name worked into the cuff in red yarn made by her mother before she passed. That November, she hung them early. Ryan, Lily, and a fresh new one she'd had made for Claire's baby that wasn't even born yet, a name embroidered for a child who didn't exist. There was no stocking for Emma. When I asked about it lightly in front of 3 relatives, Margaret touched her pearls and said, "She's not quite ours yet, dear. Let's not rush it. The unborn baby was ours enough." My 7-year-old, who'd been calling Daniel almost dad for a year, was a guest on probation. Emma didn't cry. That was the part that undid me. She just got very still and looked at the empty bit of mantle where a stocking would go. And then she put her cold little hands in her coat pockets and said she wasn't really a stocking person anyway. She'd learned that from me, the trick of getting small and gracious to make a room comfortable. I'd taught her that by accident, by example, and watching her do it made me want to take it back out out of her like a splinter. I held her hands in the car to warm them. They were freezing all the way home. I told Daniel that night that the stocking thing wasn't going to fly. I was calm. I'm always calm. It's a professional hazard. I said I wasn't asking his mother to love my kid overnight. I was asking her not to publicly rank her below an unborn baby. He gave me the speech I'd come to know by heart. Mom's old-fashioned. Sarah, she lost Dad. The house thing shook her. She's not herself. Don't make Christmas a battlefield. Just be patient. Patient. As if I'd been anything else for 8 months and $91,000. I said, patience for me is one thing, Daniel. Patience with my daughter's dignity is not mine to spend. He said I was turning a small thing into a referendum, that real families absorb friction, and that if I loved him I'd let it breathe. And here's the quiet, ugly thing I noticed, the accountant thing. He never once said he'd talk to his mother. Not once. He only ever managed me. He'd figured out that I was the cheaper problem to solve, the one who'd swallow the bill to keep the room calm. And he was right. I had been, for almost a year. If you've ever been the person a whole family counts on to be reasonable while everyone else gets to be difficult, you already know how heavy reasonable gets. Comment the word porch if you've ever stood outside a door that should have opened for you or for your child. I want to see how many of us there are. And stay with me, because the part nobody at that house saw coming is closer than they think. Subscribe so it doesn't slip past you. I went home that night and for the first time in months, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't take the blue folder out. I just looked at it sitting under Emma's drawings. And then I closed the drawer because she came in to show me something. She'd been working on it for a week in secret, tongue between her teeth, hiding it under her arm whenever I got close. It was a Christmas present for Margaret, a picture frame made out of popsicle sticks and gold paint. And inside it, instead of a photo, a crayon drawing of the Cedar Hill house, careful and lopsided, every window yellow with light. And in the doorway, 5 stick figures holding hands. Daniel, me, Emma, and taller than the rest, with a silver crayon scribble for hair, Margaret. To my new grandma, she'd written on the back with a backward N. I want you to picture me holding that thing. I've signed mortgages and audited estates and once told a widow her late husband had drained their retirement, and I kept my face still through all of it. I could not keep my face still for a popsicle stick frame. Emma had drawn the woman who wouldn't give her a stocking standing in the doorway holding her hand, included, because in my daughter's version of the world, doorways are for letting people in. I told her it was beautiful. I told her Grandma Margaret would love it. That was the only outright lie I told that whole season, and I told it looking my own child in the eye, because the alternative was explaining that some grown-ups draw the doorway and then decide who gets to stand in it. She wrapped it herself in 3 feet of tape and put it under our tree with a tag that said, "Deliver in person." I lay awake that night doing math that had nothing to do with money. The Harper Christmas Eve dinner was the event of their year, and the planning of it was a small military campaign. Claire ran logistics. That week, she had me drop off a case of wine at Cedar Hill, and while I was in the kitchen, I watched her assemble the gift bags at the island, deep green tissue, gold ribbon, identical bows. She had them in a row, counting under her breath the way I count, tucking a little tag into each. I did the thing I can't not do. I counted with her. 1 for Ryan, 1 for Lily, 1 for the cousins coming up from the city, 2 of those, 1 for the toddler of a Harper niece. 6 bags, 6 bows. I stood there with a case of Cabernet in my arms and waited for the 7th. There was no 7th bag. There was no 7th anything. The whole evening had been counted out to the place setting, and my daughter wasn't in the arithmetic. I set the wine down very gently, because I was afraid of what my hands wanted to do. Claire caught me looking and smiled, smooth as the ribbon. "Oh, we keep the bags just for the grandkids," she said. "You understand. It keeps it special." I said I understood. I'm good at saying I understand. I drove home with my jaw aching and a number forming in my chest, not a dollar number, a different kind. The kind that tells you a thing has crossed from accident into design. I found out the full picture 2 days later, and I found out by accident, which is the only way you ever find out the true things. Back when the wedding was still being planned, Claire had added me to a family group text called Harper Christmas so I could weigh in on flowers and seating. Nobody had ever removed me. I'd muted it months ago. That Tuesday night, my phone lit up anyway because someone tagged the caterer's number wrong, and the whole thread spilled open on my screen while I was washing dishes. I dried my hands and read it all, with the cold focus I usually save for a fraud case. The seating plan was there in black and white. Kids table, Claire had written Ryan, Lily, the city cousins. Then, in case it wasn't clear, our grandkids only this year. And under it, Margaret, who never texted, had typed in full, slow capital letters, "We tolerate the bookkeeper because we have to. Let's not pretend the child is family. The table is for ours." Claire had answered with a single thumbs up. "We have to." There it was, the whole architecture of it. They didn't dislike me. They resented me specifically for the $91,000 that kept a roof over the very table they were now ranking my daughter beneath. The rescue was the wound. And my Emma, with her popsicle stick frame wrapped in 3 feet of tape, was the thing they'd agreed in writing not to pretend about. I screenshotted every message, not because I had a plan yet, because I'm a bookkeeper, and when a thing matters, you keep the record. Then I sat down at the kitchen table where they had all signed my note 8 months before, and I finally opened the blue folder. I read my own promissory note like I'd never seen it before. The lien on the house was real. The acceleration clause was real. For most of a year, I had chosen every single month not to exercise that option, and my forbearance had been so quiet that the family had stopped seeing it as forbearance at all. They thought I'd written off the money. They thought my silence was weakness. It was not weakness. It was courtesy, and courtesies can be withdrawn. Even then, even reading "we have to" in those flat capitals, I gave them one more door. The door I gave them had Daniel's name on it. The next morning, I met him for coffee and laid it out plainly. No screenshots, no folder, just words. I said, Christmas Eve, Emma walks in the front door with everyone else, sits at the table, opens a gift like every other child in that house. That's the whole ask. If that can't happen, we don't come, and you and I have a much bigger conversation. I watched his face do the thing I'd been watching it do for a year. The flinch, the calculation, the search for the version of the sentence that cost him least. He reached across the table for my hand and said, you know I'm on your side. I said, I'm not asking whose side you're on, Daniel. I'm asking what you're going to do. Will you tell your mother Emma has a seat? Yes or no? And he said, I'll handle Mom. I'm an auditor at heart. I know a phrase designed to end a conversation rather than do a thing. I'll handle it is what people say when they intend to handle you. I nodded and let him think the conversation was over. But under the table, in my bag, I had already started something the night before, and his answer had just told me whether to finish it. I drank my coffee. I told him I loved him. And the awful part is that I still did. The way you love a house you already know you have to sell. Then I drove to a different appointment, one I hadn't told him about, with a woman who'd printed something for me to read. The woman was Karen Wells, a real estate attorney 2 towns over who'd done clean work for a few of my clients. I'd called her the morning after the group text and told her what I held. She'd pulled my recorded deed of trust, confirmed every comma, and now she slid a document across her desk that I made her walk me through twice, because I needed to be sure I understood it as a person and not just as a number. It was a notice of default and intent to accelerate. In careful, unhysterical legal language, it stated that the borrowers were in default for failure to make payments since the previous summer, that the holder of the note intended to exercise the acceleration option in paragraph 9, and that the entire unpaid balance would become due. And then the part I'd insisted on, the part that mattered to me more than the money, a cure period, 30 days. If they brought the loan current or refinanced it elsewhere, the acceleration would be withdrawn and we'd part as strangers who'd once done business. Karen looked at me over her glasses. You understand this doesn't take the house tonight? Foreclosure is months, if it ever comes to that, and it shouldn't. This is leverage and a clean exit, not a bomb. I said, I know exactly what it is. It's me, finally refusing to be the safety net nobody thinks. She asked when I wanted it served. I told her I'd handle delivery myself. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. I took the notice, and I took the engagement ring off my finger and put it in my coat pocket next to it. And I drove home to a daughter who was practicing how she'd say Merry Christmas, Grandma, in the mirror. That's the part one keep coming back to. She was practicing. Emma stood in front of the hall mirror in her good red dress, holding the wrapped popsicle stick frame, rehearsing. Merry Christmas, Grandma Margaret. I made this for you. She tried it 3 ways, deciding which smile to use. She asked me if she should curtsy. I said a curtsy would be perfect. Then I went into my room and put 2 things in the inner pocket of my coat, a sealed white envelope from Karen's office holding the notice, the ring, and one handwritten line I'd added myself at the bottom of a sheet of my own paper, and next to it, folded, a printout of the group text, in case I needed Margaret to know that I knew. Here was the deal I made with myself, and I made it standing in my closet like a vow. We would go to Cedar Hill. If Emma was welcomed through that front door, seated, handed a gift bag like any other child, then the envelope stayed in my coat and dissolved back into a marriage I'd spent years trying to make work. If she was not, the envelope changed hands, and so did everything else. It was the fairest test I knew how to write, and I'd written a lot of them. I gave them the chance to make me wrong. I drove to that house genuinely hoping to be wrong. If you've ever gotten dressed up to walk into a room you already half knew would hurt you, comment the word envelope, because you brought one too, even if it was only your hope. Subscribe and stay close. What Margaret said at the door is next, and I've never forgotten a word of it. Christmas Eve came down soft and cold, the kind of snow that makes everything look forgiven. Emma was electric all afternoon. She'd picked out red mittens to match her dress, the ones with the little white snowflakes, and she would not take them off. Not in the warm house, not in the warm car, because she said her hands needed to be ready to give the present. She held the wrapped frame in her lap the whole drive, both mittened hands around it like it might fly away. She asked me, somewhere on the county road, whether I thought Grandma Margaret would hang it up. In the kitchen, she decided, on a wall where everyone could see. I said yes. I want to be clear, this was the second lie, and I knew it leaving my mouth. And I told it anyway, because what was I going to say? That That the woman she'd drawn into the doorway had typed in capital letters that we shouldn't pretend the child was family? You don't hand a 7-year-old that sentence on Christmas Eve. Cedar Hill glowed up ahead through the snow, every window yellow, exactly the way she'd drawn it. From the road, it looked like the warmest place in the world. The hill was lined with cars. I parked at the bottom of the long drive, and we walked up through the snow, Emma's mittened hand in mine, her boots squeaking, her breath puffing out in excited little clouds. Music drifted from the house, and laughter, and the smell of a roast. For about 90 seconds, it was perfect. And I let it be perfect, because Emma was looking up at all those yellow windows like she was walking into a Christmas card. Then the city cousins arrived behind us, spilling out of an SUV, 2 kids in matching coats, and they ran past us up the steps, shouting Grandma. The front door opened and warm light poured out, and there was Claire in the doorway, beaming, handing each of them one of the deep green bags with the gold ribbon, lifting them by the bow so the kids could see their names on the tags. Ryan already had his. Lily already had hers. The cousins took theirs and tore inside. The gold ribbons caught the porch light and threw little glints across the snow. Emma slowed down beside me. She didn't say anything. She just watched the bags go in one after another, her own present held tight against her coat, and I felt her mitten hand tighten in mine. We reached the top step. The warm light was right in our faces. And then Margaret filled the doorway. Pearls and a green silk blouse, a hostess's smile already arranged on her face for the cousins behind us. When she saw me, the smile didn't fall so much as cool, degree by degree, like a stove being turned down. Behind her, the hall was full of light and people. Claire just inside with the last gift bag. Daniel somewhere deeper in. A dozen relatives with drinks, turning toward the open door. This is the part I've replayed the most, because it happened in front of all of them, and an audience changes what a thing means. A cruelty in a kitchen is a private wound. A cruelty in a doorway, with a foyer full of family watching and a 7-year-old in red mittens holding a wrapped present, is a verdict delivered publicly, meant to be witnessed. Margaret looked down at Emma. Emma looked up at her and lifted the present a little, the popsicle stick frame in its 3 feet of tape, and started to say the line she'd practiced in the mirror. Merry Christmas, Gran. And Margaret put one manicured hand lightly, almost gently, on the door frame. A small movement, a queen's movement, just enough to make her body the gate. The foyer went a notch quieter. Claire's smile stiffened around the edges. Somewhere behind her, I saw Daniel step forward half a pace and then stop, the way he always stopped. I felt the whole bright room tip toward us and wait. She didn't even bend down to do it. That's what I want you to understand. She delivered it standing at her full height, looking down past her pearls at a 7-year-old holding a homemade gift, in a voice pitched to carry into the foyer so the whole family could hear how a Harper draws a line. Emma, dear, she said, and the gentleness in it was the worst part, the way you'd correct a child for reaching for the wrong fork. Your daughter can wait outside. This dinner is for our kids. The words landed in the warm doorway, and the foyer went silent behind her. I felt Emma's mittened hand go still in mine. She didn't cry. My brave, careful girl did the thing I'd taught her by accident. She got small and quiet and tried to make herself easy to overlook, and she lowered the present an inch, like she'd understood she'd brought it to the wrong house. Claire, just inside, looked at the floor. The city cousins peeked around the doorway with their gold bags, sensing something, going quiet. And Margaret held her place in the gate, satisfied, certain. A woman who'd just reasserted the natural order of her world in front of witnesses. She had no idea what she'd just done. She thought she'd put a bookkeeper's daughter back in her place. What she'd actually done was pull the one thread I had wrapped 8 months ago around the whole foundation of her house, the thread I'd been holding loose this entire time, out of a love she'd just spat on. She'd told my daughter to wait outside. I looked at that hand on the door frame, and I made my decision in a single quiet breath. I looked at Daniel. He was 8 feet away in his own mother's foyer. My fiancé, the man who'd let Emma beat him at checkers 4 times in a row. The man who'd put his grandmother's ring on my hand and promised me a doorway. This was the moment, not a kitchen aside, not a text, the actual moment when a man either becomes someone or confirms he never will. I held his eyes and gave him the whole sentence without saying a word. Now, right now, just walk to this door and tell your mother my child sits at your table. He looked at me. He looked at his mother. He looked, God help him, at the floor. And then he said the only thing he had left, in a low voice meant just for me, a voice asking me to make it easier for him. Sarah, he said, please, not tonight, not now, don't do this here. There it was. I want to be fair to the woman I was on that porch, because she didn't break. Some part of me had been keeping a ledger on Daniel for a year, every flinch in one column, every I'll handle it that handled nothing in the other. And his answer just closed the account. It wasn't Margaret who ended us. Margaret was always going to be Margaret. It was the half step forward and the full stop. The please not now. The way the man who'd promised to stand in the doorway with us chose instead to stand inside it with them, asking the cold woman on the step to please be reasonable one more time. So I got calm. Not cold calm, the way I get when the numbers finally make sense and there's nothing left to do but the next correct thing. I crouched down in the snow snow to Emma's height with the whole bright foyer watching, and I did the smallest, most ordinary thing in the world. I fixed her mittens. I tugged the red cuffs up over her wrists where they'd slipped. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and I told her quietly, just for her, "You did everything right, baby. We're going to go get Coco." She nodded. She trusted me. Then I stood up and reached into the inner pocket of my coat, and I took out the plain white envelope and held it out to Margaret Harper, who was still standing in her doorway like a monument to herself. She looked at it, confused. This woman who'd expected me to argue or cry or beg had no slot in her understanding of me for an envelope. She took it the way she'd taken my hand the first day, like a damp coat, between two fingers. I didn't explain. I didn't raise my voice. I'd spent a year explaining, and it was over. I just said the words I'd been carrying up the hill. "Open it later." And then I took my daughter's mittened hand and turned my back on the warmest-looking house in the county and walked us down the long snowy drive to the car, while the foyer murmured behind us and the gold ribbons glinted in the windows. Margaret, I'm told, smiled. She thought it was a note. She thought she'd won and that I was leaving the way the defeated leave. She tucked it in her pocket to read after the toast. The car was so cold our breath fogged the windshield before the heater caught. Emma buckled herself in, still holding the wrapped present, the one that had never made it through the door, and for a long minute, neither of us said anything. I backed down the drive carefully, past all the cars, and turned onto the county road toward home, toward Maple Street, toward a small house where nobody had ever been counted out. Then, in a small, flat voice from the back seat, my daughter asked me the question I will hear for the rest of my life. "Mommy," she said, "did I do something wrong? I want you to sit with that, because I had to." 7 years old, in red mittens, holding a gift she'd made with her own hands and 3 feet of tape, and the conclusion she'd reached, standing on that step, was that the fault must be hers. That's what that house had taught her in one evening. That's what I'd risked teaching her every month I let it ride. I kept my eyes on the road because I couldn't trust my face, and I kept my voice as level as I keep it for the scared and the elderly. "No, baby," I said, "you did not do one single thing wrong. Some grown-ups forget how to be kind, and when they do, that is about them, not about you. We are not going to stand on cold steps waiting for people like that to remember." She thought about it. Then she asked if we could still have Coco. I said yes, with the little marshmallows, and she relaxed, because she's 7 and Coco is a real and solvable thing. I drove my daughter home through the snow and made her Coco with the little marshmallows, and I read her the Polar Express twice, and I tucked her in. And the whole time, in my coat by the door, my phone sat silent. They hadn't opened it yet. Margaret was still saving it for after the toast. Here's what I pieced together later, from Daniel, from Claire, from the 17 voicemails, about what happened at 11:47 that night. The dinner went on without us. The toast was made somewhere around midnight, the guests thinning, the dishes started. Margaret remembered the envelope in her pocket and opened it by the fire, probably expecting an apology, a plea, a check even, some final tribute from the woman she'd put in her place. She found 3 things. The first was the engagement ring, slid to the bottom of the envelope, which told her before she read a word that the wedding was finished. The second was a formal notice of default and intent to accelerate on Karen Wells' letterhead, citing the recorded deed of trust by its book and page number, declaring the entire unpaid balance of the loan on the Cedar Hill house immediately due, with a 30-day window to cure my $91,000. The rescue she could never forgive me for, now formally, legally, irreversibly called. And the third thing was a single line in my own hand, on a sheet of my own paper, underneath all that careful legal language. "You told my daughter she could wait outside. So can your forbearance." I'm told she read it twice. I'm told the color went out of her face the way it goes out of a room when a fuse blows. Because Margaret Harper, who had spent the evening proving to a foyer full of relatives exactly who did and did not belong at her table, understood all at once that the woman she'd shut out on the step was the one person standing between her family and the courthouse steps, and that I had been standing there quietly, holding that door open, for almost a year, with a few words, at home, with Emma asleep and the cocoa pot still in the sink. My phone lit up on the table by the door. Then it lit up again. Then it didn't stop. By morning, there were 79 missed calls. I counted them, because counting is what I do. Sitting at my kitchen table with coffee while my daughter slept in, scrolling a screen that had become a kind of seismograph of a family realizing what it had done. The voicemails were a tour through every stage at once. The first few were Margaret, and they were rage, that flat capital letter voice now shaking, calling me vindictive, calling me a snake who'd wormed into the family, demanding I tear up the notice this instant. How dare I, after everything they'd done for me? Then the tone began to slide, because somewhere around the 5th message, somebody had clearly done the math out loud, and you could hear the house go cold behind her. Claire's voicemails were panic, fast and breathless. The kids' college. Where would mom go? Surely I wouldn't. We're family. You don't do this to family. And then Daniel. Daniels were the ones that climbed from anger to bargaining to something close to weeping. "Sarah, please call me back. We can fix this. Mom didn't didn't mean it. I'll talk to her. I should have said something. I know. Please just call me. The whole year arriving 12 hours too late. I listened to all of them once, the way you read every line of a return, even when you already know the bottom number. And I noticed the thing that told me I'd made the right call. Not one of those 79 calls. Not Margaret's, not Claire's, not Daniel's. Said the word Emma. 79 calls about the house. None about the child on the step, so I did not call back. When Daniel called the 80th time live at 9 a.m., I answered, because he'd earned one sentence. He started in a rush. Sarah, thank God. Listen, about the notice. I let him finish. Then I said, very quietly, into all that noise, the terms are in the letter. Daniel, you always told me your mother handles the money. Let her handle it. And I hung up. I set the phone face down on the table, and I went and made my daughter pancakes, because it was Christmas morning and she was awake and she was asking for the kind with chocolate chips. People ask me, when I tell the story, whether I felt powerful. I didn't. I felt level, which is different, and better. For a year, that family had wielded the only weapon they had, the warm room and the closed door, the gift bags and the seating chart, the power to decide who counted. It's a real power. It had made my daughter ask if she'd done something wrong, but it was the only kind of power they understood, the kind that works by exclusion, by deciding who waits outside. And it turned out to be no match at all for the kind of power I'd been holding the whole time and refusing, out of love, to use. Theirs was a closed door. Mine was a recorded signature. They thought the worst thing they could do to me was leave me out in the cold. They never once considered that I was the reason the lights were on. That's the whole lesson of that night, if there is one. A door only has power over you while you're still knocking on it. The second you stop knocking, you find out who actually owns the wall. I want to tell you I burned it all down, but that's not what principled people do, and it's not what I did. I let the notice stand exactly as written. The 30-day cure was real, and I honored it. I was never going to seize a house out of spite with grandchildren in it on Christmas. I'm not Margaret, and the difference between us is the entire point. What I withdrew was not the roof. It was me, the unthanked safety net, the standing invitation to be used. Through Karen, I gave them their two lawful choices, the same two I'd have given any borrower in default. Bring the loan current and refinance with an actual bank on their own credit within the window, or don't, and let the law take its slow public course. They scrambled, and within 3 weeks they refinanced, which meant that for the first time in a generation, the Harpers had to walk into a bank and let a stranger see their real numbers. The very exposure Margaret had spent her whole life and $91,000 of my dollars avoiding. I was paid back in full, with interest, by a cashier's check I never had to ask for twice.